Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our second iteration of the Field Manager Development Program here in Q2, our second virtual learning session. We had a great session earlier today with the first group and really excited about sharing this with you all and hearing from you to share your perspectives. So today we're going to talk about organizational and team health, and it's going to build upon what we talked about on Monday, just a couple days ago. So these are some of the things that we'll cover, right? Learn about building trust with remote teams, talk about, continue that discussion from Monday about organizational and team health and why this is so important. And then of course, time permitting, we didn't get to this in the last session, so but communicating with different personalities, different social styles. So it's my pleasure today. I get a chance to introduce our guest speaker. So Dr. Jeb Hurley joins us today. Jeb comes from a sales and product management background. He's co-founded 3 different software companies and literally wrote a book about building high performance teams. So I'll let you, as you read this, I'll tell you, some additional things about Jeb. I visited his LinkedIn profile, and I'll highlight a few things that folks said about him. The consummate technology entrepreneur, a brilliant leader who relentlessly keeps the focus where it should be, the customer. And Jeb is an exceptional leader, business strategist, visionary, and mentor. He's passionate about understanding the customer perspective in order to drive innovation into products and services. His ability to build a strategy around what will drive the most revenue along with ensuring customer satisfaction is exceptional. So I think you'd all agree with that awesome, rich, robust background. It has so many analogs and parallels to our environment here, GitLab. The one thing I'll also say too that I really liked was in visiting Jeb's profile, his profile background has a quote from John Quincy Adams. It's, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader." So I invite you all to take on that mindset of how do we be exponential leaders for the organization as we continue along GitLab's exciting growth trajectory, and take some time to think about how we can build trust with the teams to help us reach that peak performance. So Jeb, over to you.
All right, David, thank you so much. It's kind of interesting that it's unusual for somebody to be able to sort of make me blush twice in a day. And you managed to do that. So I appreciate again, the very gracious and complimentary introduction. Let me share my screen. I should be able to do that. And shrink this. Are we good? Are you guys able to see that? Great.
Yep.
We're good. Awesome. Well, again, David, thank you. And everyone I assume this is probably mostly good afternoons and good evenings, although I suppose depending on where in the world you could be coming up sunrise in some spots. So good morning if that's the case. And thank you for joining me as we look to connect the dots, the human dots that link trust, well-being, and performance on remote teams. I've come to have this belief that as I look at modern organizations, sort of particularly companies born, in the 21st century, that thriving is really about developing leaders who, among other things, become very skilled at creating trust, have developed the ability to intrinsically motivate people, and really excel at repairing and strengthening relationships but perhaps even more importantly, between teams. And what's interesting to me is that often the reaction I get from that statement is that sounds like common sense. And perhaps that's true. But I've also found that it is very rarely common practice. So we're going to focus on turning that common sense into common practice. And I'm going to do that in the next little less than an hour that we've got. by looking at the crucial role that trust plays in fostering organizational health and individual well-being. And this is especially true for people working remotely. We'll also explore a little bit, and I promise not to go too deep, but the neurobiology of trust and how you can use that knowledge to improve both well-being and performance on your teams. And as you are all part of customer-facing, revenue growth-driven remote teams, I also promise that I'll give you a practical, sort of real-world approach to connecting those human dots between trust and performance. And we're going to do that by, at least by example, with the data that you all provided on how people's behavior is impacting your work. So with that, make sure I can move ahead. Very little about me. Yeah, David already gave that gracious introduction. So, sort of this thing, if I were to synthesize that into 3 words, I've had the good fortune of being an executive and entrepreneur, and more recently, sort of the path of becoming a behavioral scientist. Perhaps more relevant to this group, I've carried quota, and sort of many times over those years as both an individual contributor, as a sales rep, for entire companies. When you're the CEO, you absolutely carry quota, particularly in the eyes of the board. And then most recently, the past 8 years, I did a lot of work transforming and sales enablement teams at HP in Asia, out of Singapore. And throughout all of that period of time, I carried full quota for the Asian region, for both for revenue for sales, product solutions, and services. For someone who isn't very enthusiastic, typically, about school or wasn't, I've spent a lot of time in places of learning, from studying economics and history, an MBA, and a doctorate, as again David mentioned. And over the years, I've done a lot of work with nonprofits. I've been taught as an adjunct professor, do a lot of mentoring, authored a couple of books, over 70 articles, and sort of outside of that type of beyond the office work, I've spent many years practicing and teaching in the martial arts. Love to ski and play golf, and occasionally, when my better half, my wife, talks me into it, a little bit of ballroom dance. Now, before we jump into the specifics of linking trust and performance, I want to play one of my favorite clips from Simon Sinek, because he does a really good job of connecting those dots. And it just so happens in my research, I had the opportunity to work with a number of very elite teams and drew some of the same, or had some of the same conversations as Simon did.
I worked with the Navy SEALs, and I asked them, like, how do you pick like the guys that go on SEAL Team 6, right? Because they're the best. And they drew a graph for me, and on one side they wrote the word performance, and on the other side they wrote the word trust. The way they define the terms is performance on the battlefield and performance off the battlefield. So this is your skills. This is, did you make your quarterly earnings, however you want to translate it, right? Performance, it's traditional. This is, how are you off the battlefield? What kind of person are you? The way they put it is, I may trust you with my life, but do I trust you with my money and my wife? This is what they told me. Nobody wants this person, the low performer of low trust, of course. Of course, everybody wants this person, the high performer of high trust, of course. What they learned is that this person, the high performer of low trust, is a toxic leader and a toxic team member. And they would rather have a medium performer of high trust, sometimes even a low performer of high trust, it's a relative scale, over this person. This is the highest performing organization on the planet, and this person is more important than this person. And the problem in business is we have lopsided metrics. We have 1,000,001 metrics to measure someone's performance, and negligible to no metrics to measure someone's trustworthiness. And so what we end up doing is promoting or bonusing toxicity in our businesses, which is bad for the long game because it eventually destroys the whole organization. The irony is, it's unbelievably easy to find these people. Go to any team and say, who's the asshole? And they will all point to the same person. Equally, if you go to any team and say, who do you trust more than anybody else? Who's always got your back? And when the chips are down, they will be there with you. They will also all point to the same person. It's the best gifted natural leader who's creating an environment for everybody else to succeed. And they may not be your most individual highest performer, but that person, you better keep them on your team.
Cool. What I love about this clip is the clarity. You know, you come away with a really strong sense of why trust and why trust is so important to performance. But what you don't get is the how to make that connection. Interestingly, I found the answer to how leaders can connect those dots between trust and performance in science, and specifically behavioral science. Behavioral science shows us how we can leverage people's neurobiology, reinforcing and rewarding behaviors. And this is especially important when people are separated by cultures and by generations and by time zones, because the key to building and leading a diverse group of people is to build relationships from a common denominator that can scale. That's the neurobiology of trust. So now we're going to take just a few minutes to look at how that works. Most of us, if we're reasonably healthy, have a deeply embedded sense of what trust is or what a violation of trust feels like. And that's why we place trust at the top of what's important to us. It's always an essential character trait that we look for in our important relationships. But trust is also a catalyst. And I mean that sort of in a literal sense. It's because trust and the process of building and experiencing trust in relationships stimulates the production of the neurochemical oxytocin. And I want everybody to look and memorize this because there'll be a quiz at the end. Oxytocin, it essentially acts like a volume dial in our brain, turning up and amplifying positive feelings and experiences, and sometimes all the way to 11. Teams with high trust, and you can see kind of some of the data here, basically feel more connected. They're like musicians. If you've ever watched a band that's really good at riffing off of one another, they sort of intuitively know what their teammates need, and they get really good at delivering it reliably. One of the, just a quick sort of a side story, during my doctoral research, I spent time with some Israeli fighter pilots, and the most intriguing part of the story that behind their journey to becoming sort of the 1% of the 1% of aspiring applicants that actually become a pilot is the role that trust and relationships play in that process. And it was a little surprising because the exceptional physical and mental abilities and acumen are just basic requirements. It's like everybody at that level has got those. What they explained to me was it's the ability to develop that deep trust that enables them to riff off of one another in a millisecond at supersonic speeds that distinguishes the very best from the rest. And as one over dessert, actually, the squad leader said to me, trust is what gives us the confidence that when we go to work, everybody's going to come back home. And what's interesting is that while, of course, that type of work is extreme, I heard the same thing from ER and OR teams, and from basically, when people find purpose in their work, what drives us to do it and where we find the energy around it is the same. Whether you're flying a fighter jet or you're doing the type of work we do in corporate settings. And healthy, trusting relationships are vital to that performance for a couple of three reasons. First, because, and this will resonate, I know, at GitLab because of your focus on core values, is that because those relationships, they reinforce those values. And in doing so, they create well-being. And enable people to work together in a safe, authentic, and really fully engaged way. The other interesting element that's perhaps a little less obvious is that those types of relationships are also the antidote to toxic people and cultures. And that's why leaders who master managing team relationships and inspiring trust become exceptional at delivering peak performance, but also improving people's mental health and well-being on their team. At the center of creating and maintaining those healthy, trusting relationships is a core behavioral science dynamic, the experience expectation dynamic that we're going to go through that, and it threads through sort of everything that you actually do as a leader. And that's because as humans, we have an expectation of every experience that actually we ever have. Many times some of those expectations are non-conscious, but they're there. And it's differences between those expectations with important relationships. You know, at work, that's going to be likely your boss, your teammates, maybe colleagues on other teams that you depend on, versus our experience with those people that can create trust gaps. And trust gaps are simply barriers that get in the way of healthy, trusting relationships, people's performance, and their well-being. So it can be things like, for instance, poor communications, unconscious biases, a perception of people free riding, and again, on remote teams, you know, that's something you always have to watch out for, and the low psychological safety that's associated with it. So let me give you a rather somewhat extreme example of sort of how this dynamic can work. So imagine before your first Zoom call, you fix an espresso or equivalent, and it's from a blend that you haven't actually tried before. And so you expect that you're going to enjoy it. Instead, it's not that great. And so that's an expectation experience gap that you'll remember, primarily so that you don't buy that blend again, but it's not going to ruin your day. But now you join the Zoom call with your colleagues, and you're blindsided when a manager from another group that you support calls you out for a mistake that you made, a small mistake you made last week. It does this very publicly, and your expectation is that that kind of feedback is always done respectfully and one-on-one. So what just happened? The dramatic gap with your experience is going to likely first leave you embarrassed because of the reaction that you have in others, and then probably angry afterwards. So this manager just created a serious trust gaps. And what actually happens sort of neurobiologically is that type of trust gap, it does two things immediately. One, it blocks reward neurochemicals like oxytocin or dopamines. And it simultaneously triggers the release of a stress neurochemical called cortisol. And literally, you know, if you've been in this situation or one close to it ever, you literally feel this in the pit of your stomach. And what happens is, you know, engagement drops, and, you know, it may be for an hour or two, it could be for the entire day, but you're not going to have your productivity absolutely takes a hit. And when trust gaps aren't addressed over time, they harm not only productivity and performance, but also people's mental health, physical health, and overall well-being. And trust gaps, interestingly, they are the number one behavioral cause of disengagement and turnover in organizations. And it's actually where the cliche that people leave their boss, not their job, that's where it comes from, is that if you in any important relationship had a continuous gap between what you expect of that relationship versus what you experience, that over time degrades that relationship. It diminishes, and ultimately you disengage. Now, the solution to closing trust gaps is something, it's something I've termed team relationship coaching. And that, it revolves around three very simple steps. The first is you've got to know a gap is there. So it's that ability to, and developing the skills of being able to identify that experience expectation gap. Second, it's creating nudges, small changes that change people's behavior in order to close gaps. And, you know, this continuous virtuous cycle is incredibly powerful, because as trust grows, so does the flow of oxytocin primarily, but also dopamine and other reward neurochemicals that reinforce and reward trust building behaviors. And so it's a little bit, if you, I like to use a metaphor of trust ladders, where, this cycle, adds rungs to a ladder. As your expectations of a relationship grow and people deliver on it, or you deliver on it in the case of being a leader, you move people up that trust ladder. And through that process, you're continuously rewarding behaviors that people want to repeat. Now, before we move on to connecting the human dots between trust and performance using the data that you all provided, let me just stop for a second and take a breath, take a drink, and answer any questions you might have about sort of those elements I just covered through sort of the foundations of trust as a catalyst, the experience expectation dynamic, and then the team relationship coaching cycle. So and please, you can just throw it into the feed, into the chat, or just come off mute and shout it out.
I thought it was interesting in the grid that you showed, how you stated that the high-performing, low-trust person in the upper left-hand corner,
Yes.
how easy that person is to find. There's a lot of those people out there. That resonated for me. It was nice to see that visual. It was great to hear that video and just make it so black and white.
Yeah, exactly. And it is what's that. It's great observation and point, because it's one of those things that, yes, and Simon Sinek always does a great job of this in terms of the whys is, we experience things like that, but until you see it in a little visual, you're like, oh my God, yeah, I used to work with like 3 people like that, and it drove us all nuts. And yeah, it's very, and it's the why of it that when you dig down a few layers, that becomes so important, and how organizations too often encourage those kinds of behaviors that ultimately are disruptive to not only the organization, its productivity and performance, but also, again, to people's well-being at work.
I see. Awesome. Thank you for commenting in the chat. Would you like to verbalize your question?
Sure, happy to. Hey, Jeb, my name is Asim. This isn't a question for me, so to say. I'm just more curious. I hope I haven't lost trust. But if you have, how do you gain it back? Or I don't want to steal your thunder if you're going to get into it later at some point.
Yeah, no, it's actually we'll see it perhaps as we move on, but no, it's a great question around because it revolves around that dynamic of experience expectation and the metaphor of trust ladders. So, and I think it's particularly important to just make that distinction between sort of trust as a character trait, the one we look for in all of our important relationships. And that's important because that's sort of trust at that level falls into the love, hate, trust, these big sort of emotional, they have a lot of emotional valence to them. And let me give you an example of that. If I come to you and point out, I said, I give you a little bit of feedback in that last meeting we had, you probably could have communicated a little more clearly around this particular item. Your reaction to that is likely what? Probably to say thanks. Hey, I appreciate that. I can, I'll look at that, and it's not a, I didn't trigger any kind of massive sort of, oh my God, the wheels are coming off. But if I come to you or anyone and say, you know what, I've gotten some feedback that people don't really trust you. What's your reaction to that? And because when we look at it through the lens of a character trait, that is viewed at, and it feels like, the reaction typically is you literally feel that in the pit of your stomach, that it's, a fundamental breach of who we want to be as a person, unless we're kind of a psychopathic narcissist, in which case we don't care. But for most of us, we care. And that's important to recognize, because to go back to your question, that when you treat trust as a catalyst, as I am being intentional about the expectations I'm setting versus the experience I'm delivering, then recovering trust, depending on what breached it, is a matter of rebuilding trust ladders. That in a work environment, it's about consistently setting an expectation and then delivering on it and raising. And as you raise the bar in terms of the expectations you're setting and consistently delivering, or if you're leading a team or an organization that they're doing that, you will recover trust, at least in the setting of the organization. Somebody may not, they may not want to go out and be best buddies with you, but you will have recovered trust in the context of work, because there, you come in every day to GitLab, you've got OKRs, we've got things to accomplish as a group of people, as members of the GitLab organization. And as long as you're doing that and you're doing that consistent with the values of the organization, you're building trust, it'll work. So it all comes back down to making trust an intentional catalyst by identifying gaps, creating behaviors that ultimately close those gaps. Because as you do that, you're triggering the neurobiology that rewards people for trusting you. And that's, as humans, that's where we want to be. We don't want to come to work every day thinking that, we can't trust the people we work with suck. No, we actually want to come to work and believe that we're working with people that we can trust. And by creating that, you close the gap. Make sense?
Thank you for that.
Sure, you're welcome.
Anthony, I'd love you to verbalize the quote you shared. I think it's a good one.
It's just from a previous leader that was very focused on trust. Another company I worked at actually did measure, they called it the Leadership Trust Index. So they went through a process of a number of surveys, but he distilled it down to simply in what he calls drips and buckets, which is you earn trust in drips and you lose it in buckets. So you can, the analogy is, you might do 20, 30, 40, 50 behaviors that build trust, and you've only got to do one wrong and you can wipe that bank account away in a single moment. So he was just saying it's part of always think about every interaction and what the consequences are from a positive perspective, rather than that one mistake, which can be very difficult to recover from, which is kind of related to Sim's question.
Yes, yeah, Anthony, that's a great analogy, and it's interesting that kind of going back to the fighter squadron story. One of the things that these guys emphasized is, people, because of the rigors and what it takes to achieve that role, that people think of them as like super soldiers, and the reality is they're human, and they, just like all of us, we're pretty good at. It's like playing golf. There's a million ways to mishit the shot, and one way to kind of really do it right. And so we're pretty good at sabotaging our own best intentions. And what they get really good at is not trying to be perfect people, because that's a thankless task. It's getting really good at closing gaps. And so they get that down to, kind of an art that if there's a gap, you don't fly with gaps, you close them before you come out of the operations room. And that's the key is, you will lose it. We all do at times. You just got to get really good at being intentional about closing them. Good.
Christian, you got the next one.
Sure. So, obviously, the best way to deal with folks who are in that top left on that grid is to not have them on the team in the first place. So I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts about how to maybe identify some early warning signals or markers in somebody you're considering maybe adding to the team that might potentially become one of those people, and how you might avoid bringing them on.
Yeah, that's like a whole nother topic, but there's, if you want to explore it, sort of the behavioral interviewing and, looking at, I find that it's in stories and the way people tell them. And it's pretty easy to identify narcissism because people have trouble hiding it. If you just ask them straightforward series of questions, smart people are pretty good at covering it. If you ask them to tell stories and really listen about how they approached people issues, and you listen for, how much of it was about them and versus how much of it was the we and about the team and the things they accomplished. In other words, how are they seeing performance? Because if it's all about me and what I did and how I did these things, then you're likely, and by the way, there are also psychometric, sort of instruments you can use to, pre-employment kinds of tests to identify these tendencies. But I love behavioral interviewing simply because you get to listen to stories, but you just listen for, how much of that is about, what I did for the team, how I encouraged other people to be great versus I did this, I did that, this is my performance, here's how I hit my metrics. And that's particularly important, I found, in sales organizations where team selling, when it's a team sport, if you're looking for coin-operated salespeople who are just out there to hit a number, fantastic, that's all you need. But boy, as soon as you move into a team selling environment, you really want people who see, hitting the numbers as a team sport.
Reshmi,
Thanks.
I love your question here too. Really good questions, everybody. Thanks so much for contributing. Reshmi, would you like to vocalize?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, Jeb.
Hey, Reshmi.
So my question is more around, do ways to build trust differ by different personality traits? I recently read this book by Adam Grant, Give and Take, and it was interesting because he talks a lot about these people who have like either giver, taker, or matcher personalities, and how different things matter to each of the personalities. So I'm wondering if there are different techniques to establish trust for different personalities.
Yeah, great question, and I'm a huge fan of Adam's work and the research he does at Penn.
He was my professor, by the way.
Oh yeah, he's great. We're actually connected, and I do. He's a deep thinker in this space. So this goes back to making that distinction between personality and the way in which we sort of interact with the world, right? That's our personalities, and they are unique to us, and they don't scale. So the behavior that one leader may have in terms of how they express themselves or personality, that's really hard. In fact, it's really unwise for someone else to replicate. So the answer there is, does personality play into how people will perceive and receive trust? Absolutely. However, there's also a truism in behavioral science, which is neurobiology scales, personality doesn't. So when you get to the core of how you create trust and sustain it, which is that intentionality about the expectations you set and the experiences you deliver, that is agnostic to gender, to culture, to personality. So if you think of it as, if you get good at that as a leader, at being very intentional, leading with trust, I am going to think about how I establish that, those expectations for myself or my team with other teams and in the organization, and what we deliver, that allows you the freedom to then wrap your own identity, your own style as a leader around that. And that's where personality comes in. So it's the mismatch happens that, I may have a great personality, and maybe you're very charming, but if I really am lousy at that experience expectation dynamic, I don't care how charming you are, people are not going to have near the level of trust with you as someone who may be a little more taciturn, maybe not all that charming, but boy, they consistently set expectations and deliver against those. So, my advice to leaders is always, look, you want to build, as a leader, you want to be, you want that to become your own brand as a leader, how you use your personality to greatest advantage. But every leader should be intentional about how you go about using trust as a catalyst, because it's so fundamental to our neurobiology, and it will scale across an entire leadership team. It'll scale.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. Essentially, be consistent.
Yes, around the things that the things that scale, and I think into some of the work that you were referring to, is really about, hey, recognizing your own personality, how it affects people, etc. But focus on those fundamentals.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Jeb.
You're welcome.
Jeb, what are a couple of the most common mistakes that you see managers and leaders making as it relates to building trust with remote teams? And then what are some suggestions you have of how do you avoid those pitfalls? And if that's too much of a softball, is there one that's like especially unique, or one that may be not so obvious?
Yeah, I'll go back to, yes, and I'll sort of focus it right in, because it actually is, it goes back to that, my original comment about, what seems like common sense is often not common practice. The biggest, and I have to call it mistake, but perhaps it is, but it's certainly a behavioral trait, is that because trust, we put it into that big T category along with love and hate, and we assume that people will trust us, and we don't make it intentional by sort of using our cognitive brains to say, wow, what are, on my team, what is the expectation that each person on my team has of me? Is it clear the expectation I have of them? And it's not just around your OKRs, it's about them as human beings. And how am I doing with the experience there? It's that intentionality in doing that. That is the biggest gap I see. And it's, by the way, it's also going back to the point made earlier, and going back to the Simon Sinek chart. Those folks in that, what's really interesting is those people up in that upper left-hand quadrant, they think people trust them. They absolutely are shocked when they hear people. But why? Well, because I'm a top performer. I'm hitting my numbers. I'm driving results. And if someone ever says to them, what, people think you're an idiot. We don't like working with you. They're shocked because they associated those two pieces and assumed trust. So number one behavior that gets managers in trouble is they just assume that everybody trusts
them. I love that. Yeah, about being, like Reshmi said, be deliberate, be intentional about it, keep it top of mind.
Exactly. And that's why this little cycle is so powerful.
Any additional questions?
Not, we'll jump into the data.
I don't see any in the doc, so let's do that.
Okay, awesome. All right, so coming into today's session, and I want to thank everyone, because you guys are just off the charts awesome when it comes to the quality of your feedback. So you did a GitLab 1 and a GitLab 2. One was manager, one was cross team. And what Trust Metrics does, and this sort of emerged out of, at least part of it emerged out of my research, was it blends neuroscience and behavioral science and software to really look at how you can build trust, break down silos, and kind of fire up the brain's reward system to make change stick on teams. And so what I'd like to do now is we're going to look at the results that came back that you guys provided. I'm going to do that fairly quickly so that we have time to talk about nudges a bit together, and then we'll follow it up at the end with a more general kind of ask me anything as we've gone through that. So let's start with the feedback from the manager, from you guys giving feedback on your experience versus your expectation with your manager. And so this is the experience map that plots out where people fall. The relationship strength score of 62 basically indicates that you have high, and this is on a scale of -100 to +100. You on the whole, as an organization, you have high expectations of your managers, and they're delivering positive experiences. And that's pretty cool, because I will tell you, I look at a lot of these, and I will tell you that this is unusual, that the scatter is far more dispersed in most organizations when people are asked about that experience expectation dynamic with their manager. Now, what's interesting here is you've got two distinct clusters. The first, this contains most of the people, and it's really concentrated kind of in that top 10% quartile of strong relationships, which is absolutely awesome. If you look at the second cluster, that shows a smaller group that have experienced greater inconsistencies with with the manager. And you'll see that reflected in the comments that we'll look at a couple of those in a minute. And this represents what, again, is not an abnormal in fact, it is abnormal and it's skewed positive to the right in terms of distribution. But you've got a group of managers or people having experiences with their manager that create an opportunity for improvement. The good news is that if you look at where sort of the line's drawn, you've got some high expectations, some deterioration in one place, and a couple at the crosshairs. But on the whole, if anyone, sort of looking at this and analyzing it, you guys are really in good shape based on this one set of data in terms of those relationships. And the comments kind of reflect that. I mean, I love this first one, which was around someone said being incredibly lucky to have a manager that actually listens to me, which kind of indicates probably in the past, probably not at GitLab, they didn't quite have that experience. But then there were also a couple, if you look at the bottom two there, this assuming good intent is a psychological safety flag that is easy to correct, but one that's important to recognize on a team. And the last one, undercutting from my manager that left me unenthused. That's a slightly more serious psychological safety issue. Again, these are the good news is these are the kinds of things that are pretty easy to address once they're flagged on a team. Now, if we look at and by the way, you guys, I had looked at the divisional employee engagement feedback, and it was nice to see that the scores there, the engagement scores there with your manager is nicely mapped to what you see here. Now, we have a slightly different picture around the cross-team experience map. As you can see, the distribution is considerably more stretched there. Overall, people have basically mixed expectations of other teams. You can see that in the pattern and the relationship strength score of 28. And what that reflects is that's really an early predictor of growing friction and productivity loss. Anytime sort of I see this pattern, it does, it usually in a high performing organization that's growing really fast. And once again, there's sort of two clusters here. This time, the larger population is in the second cluster. And again, that indicates, and without seeing this being done a couple of times, this is more of a speculation than it is hard data, but that there are weakening relationships that if they're left unchecked, you see two things happening, or three things happening actually. You'll see silos growing, the number of them. You see more processes being put in place that are more a reflection of the relationship weakening and lower productivity, along with higher turnover in the organization. And the interesting thing is, this isn't uncommon at all during periods of really high growth in organizations. The key is that you catch it early and close the gaps, because they're much easier to fix when they're showing up, when you see them early. And at that point, they also have a much bigger impact on people and performance in the organization. When it begins to ossify in an organization, it's a whole lot harder to fix. And at that point, you also have often you have levels of cynicism that have crept in because people have been there. They said this doesn't work, and you get a lot more resistance to change. So to me, really interesting data set. And again, you see it reflected in some of the feedback. Where in that upper right, you see comments around collaborating openly, sharing success. As you sort of move down, the last comment, hey, I expected progress on these longstanding issues. Instead, we got more issues. So, that's a very clear example of and where silos forming, processes being substituting for people. That's the kind of reaction that you get from people. And if you recall we're going back a couple of slides, the solution is actually a fairly simple one around developing your team relationship coaching skills. And that of course starts with those seeing gaps that can diminish people's performance and trust, and then simply doing something about it, which is which is behavioral. It's what behavior do I want to change? And you do that with nudges. So before we jump into, and I'm going to switch gears in a second to looking at the actual data in trust metrics, and we'll work on a couple of nudges together. I want to quickly talk about what they are and what they're not. So what nudges aren't is a 25 item list of actions that you're going to take based on some massive feedback survey, which is often what happens in like biannual engagement surveys where you get a ton of data, all kinds of actions. And the problem is that you're changing tires on moving cars every day. And so what you end up doing is maybe you get to the first couple, it goes in the drawer, and then 6 months later, you get a sort of another top-down from HR kind of report. Nudges are the exact opposite. They're all about what is the small action the smallest action you can take that will get people to think and behave differently. And what really enables them to work most effectively is when they're very aligned with your values, and when team members, and remember this is about the team, hold themselves accountable for achieving them. Because when you get a team or a team leader to take that small step in the direction of new behavior, kind of like going to the gym. If you go, you sign up for a new gym membership, you go, on January 1st, you work out for 3 hours, and you're sore for the next month. You probably, your enthusiasm of going back is, it's close to zero. As opposed to, let me take the small steps where I begin to see progress each time, and over a period of a few months, you make a big difference. And that's, you're much more likely to achieve your objectives. That's what makes nudges a powerful tool for improving both performance and well-being on a team. Okay, so now I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to switch gears here. And go back to share screen. Should be here and share. You can let me know if you see that.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So this is the map we just looked at, cross team, and I'm going to quickly. This is, by the way, this is the nudge workspace for team leaders and their teams. So we can look at that entire map of the feedback you provided, and we can sort of, if I were in a team meeting and chose to sort of share, we can jump from, and as you can see, it's completely anonymous. There's just some ID here, but no one has access to who said what. But we can look across the map at comments made, or I can switch gears and just look at all of the comments. And again, I've got to compliment you guys at the level of thought and quality you put into this is just off the charts. I mean, I look at some of these, literally, kind of multiple paragraphs, which is truly awesome. But what we're going to do is what I did, I read through all of those. And then this is typically what you would do as, in this case, say a division manager, where you were looking at feedback across a large group. And I synthesized them down into, I stopped at 3, but synthesis 1, 2, and 3 here. And what I'd like to do, and you can quickly kind of look at each one. The first is kind of around cross-team collaboration. The second is more around behaviors that are kind of around psychological safety. And the third is more with interactions with mid or senior level managers. So what I'd like to do for just a couple of minutes is now that we talked about nudges, we talked about the experience expectation dynamic, what are some of the behaviors that you would suggest if this was, let's say this was your organization, you synthesized this feedback, what are a couple of the behaviors that you would put in place to begin to drive change in the organization with the goal of moving, again, we look at this map, you want everyone up in that upper right-hand corner, and at the moment, you've got a fairly broad distribution. What are the things you're going to begin to do, based on this synthesis? So read it for a minute, and then just sort of shout out and share with everyone your thoughts.
So Jeb, this is Jim.
Yeah, Jim.
I guess one thought would be, if I was going through this with the team, might be which one of these would the team like to focus on initially? Kind of get their involvement, maybe to try to assess with my team, which ones of these might be the big rocks that we might be able to initially focus on.
Yeah, that's a Jim, a tremendous point. One of the biggest failings of so many of sort of approaches to getting at these kinds of issues is that they're kind of a 20th century leftover of a top-down approach, which assumes that, you know, the engagement surveys know the right questions to answer and that they're delivered from the top. The most effective approach, and this really, if you spend time with elite teams, it's the team solving it. And so you're spot on with that. This is all about the team taking ownership for and getting the resources if they need from outside, from more senior management or other teams, but the team owns it. You're spot on.
And then I guess my follow-on, since you did just throw, would be, we talk about minimal viable change at GitLab. So yeah. I think I might, okay, once we assess which one of these three, start to ideate, we'll throw all the jargon around on this call, about, you know, what might be some of the small steps this team could take today that would help influence in a positive direction some of these challenges.
Exactly. So either you or someone else jump in. And again, remember, this is about behavioral change. So it's not, let me put in, I need a new form, that's done in triplicate for us to fix this process. Maybe true, but this is about people and involving people. So behaviorally, yeah, just what would be your thought on sort of something that you would look at and say, wow, maybe we could do this?
Well, I think, so looking at synthesis number 2, speaking up about uncertainty. I was just on a call earlier today with a few folks on my team, and they were bringing up about Todd Baer leaving. And we've had a couple other folks leaving recently. And what does this mean? And so that we spent a little bit of time, I didn't have the benefit of this training yet, to talk about, well, what concerns you about that? What do you think might be some of the reasons for that? I had some senior folks and some newer folks. The senior folks, they've seen this movie a million times. The more junior folks are like, wow, something bad happening here. So as a team, we just talked about there are a variety of reasons that some of these changes could occur. But in technology, change is the constant, right? So, Mike Pyle, I don't know if Mike's on this call, he talks about we kind of are renting relationships with our people over time. That's very different than 30 years ago. So let's maximize our time together. Let's help develop our people during our time together. And let's just talk about everyone is on a different kind of journey as a professional, and why they might be leaving GitLab might be, just something that makes sense for them that doesn't imply some greater challenge with GitLab, and other folks should be concerned as a result.
Yeah, really good points. Yeah, I think that the other dynamic that's important with particularly synthesis number 2 is, as from a manager standpoint, to recognize, and this goes back to why values and your core values in any organization, at GitLab specific, and on remote teams specifically, one of the challenges is maintaining psychological safety at a distance, and how you respond to risk areas like turnover, and by encouraging people to identify risks early. One of the things we tend to do as managers is we react to that. So here's a risk, and we react. What we forget to do, and this is essential to these kinds of, where people speak up about issues with another team in particular, and maybe, as you said, with turnover, it's somebody who's really gotten tired of dealing with X or Y in group B, A or B, is you praise the early warning. And rather than just react. And again, that's that intentionality around the expectation you're setting versus the experience. If you set an expectation of getting early warning about unpleasant news, what you want to do in terms of the experience you create is trigger a positive neurobiological response in the person that had the courage to give you that news. So by praising it, you trigger a little bit of that oxytocin, and then you can freak out. Then it's like, oh my God, we got a whole department leaving. Fine, but you want to keep reinforcing from a psychological safety standpoint that core value that we really appreciate as managers, as leaders, having risk issues raised early. So that's, if I were plotting a nudge there, it would be nudging, if you had a group of team leaders that you were in your group, I would be coaching each one of them to really encourage and asking about risks early, and then praising people who bring it up. Jim, thank you. Any other sort of other thoughts, comments on, as you think about as a manager, what's the nudge you would put in place for yourself, or maybe for your boss or for your team?
Hey, Jeb, this is Nick. I think on that last point, one of the things that I've missed as a manager is a lot of times people don't want to speak up because they get this anxiety of whatever I'm going to say is bad and I'm going to get in trouble for saying it.
Yes.
So it's teaching them how to say it. One of the things that we learned in this week was the SBI, the situation, behavior, and impact framework, to be able to provide feedback. We also have the responsibility to teach people to on how to bring a problem forward and potentially bring possible solutions, right? Instead of just saying, bring the problem forward.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's not, that's sort of you're not allowed to just shift the monkey to my back kind of thing. And that's, to I think it was Jim made the earlier point, was this is a team sport. And what's powerful about keeping the sort of being data driven around undeniable behaviors, within a team, is that you can keep it there and say, hey, wait a second, this is, as the team leader, this is not, this isn't all on my shoulders. This is how we as a team are going to operate. And again, why core values are so important, because you're right. It's coaching people that when you bring, I want the courage to bring something forward, but I also expect the critical thinking to present options and solutions to the team for us to work this together. It's really powerful because, again, the intentionality around the neurobiology, when you think about that, when you set that expectation, that you make sure you reward it so that people repeat it. They get into a zone of saying, oh, wow, yeah. Every time when I bring this up to Nick, he immediately acknowledges, the courage I had to bring it up, the fact that I brought forward a potential solution, and I got praised for that. And, that's often the piece missing in sort of the equation is, hey, how am I affecting people, how they feel in the equation? And in doing that, you're supporting their mental health and their well-being. Other thoughts? Questions?
We're about at that time for a break. Jeb, and in the Slack or in the Zoom chat, there was a question about, hey, are we going to be using this tool? What's this about? And Josh, do you want to share, you verbalize what you had shared about, some teams are piloting this, and elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, there are a few teams piloting this. I think Sherrod's on the call. She used it with her team. There are a couple others from one of our manager enablement sessions, and Jeb and Elena have graciously allowed us to use trust metrics, and it's been really insightful. Jeb, I don't know if you want to give a little plug as well on the usage of it, but that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I think that again, the whole concept around building trust on teams is at that, using it as a catalyst. So the whole idea behind trust metrics is just very simple. It's my ability to see where the breakdowns might be occurring, where silos might be building, in order to create the conversation with my team around nudges. And to core the behavioral science of trust metrics is all around its nudge engine, its ability to do what we just did, to visualize data and then create a conversation and then track it over time. Because just like going to the gym, it's being able to see the progress. It's like over month in, month out, how did I move, what did I do to move people from the lower parts of the chart to the upper? And that's sort of the core of, from a behavioral standpoint, the skill sets that you as leaders, and I promise you, if you build those, if you get good at that little cycle, and trust metric, it makes, you change the world a little bit. Because not only are you going to keep the performance of your team at a peak, you're going to make their lives better at work. And the whole idea with trust metrics is to provide you with a simple, easy to use platform for your team to be able to do that.
Sherrod, is there anything that you want, not to put you on the spot, you can pass?
Happy to.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think I almost jumped in on your question around nudges, Jeb. I think what I've liked about the survey so far has been the consistency of them and the overtime element. Also, too, your nudges are little things such as, like, make sure you touch on these things in your one-to-ones. And it doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It's just the consistency over time. And I think that's what I've really liked about it. We did it with our managers, just for context of those on the call, and are going to roll it out to the broader TAM team. We wanted to do it with the managers first to get a handle on it, so we kind of knew what we were talking about and could advocate for it before we rolled it out to the broader TAM team. So that's next.
Cool. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so we will take a 10-minute break. I've got 3 after, so 15 after, so about 12 minutes. We will resume and finish out the session. If anybody does have any additional questions, we'll hang out for just a little bit. Jeb, is that still okay?
That works for me. I'll hang out here. And yeah, if anyone has any other comments, questions, fire away, and happy to chat about it.
Awesome. Otherwise, we'll see you back in about 10 minutes, folks. 15 after.
Hey, David and Jeb, I think one of the things on the cross-team topic was, and I didn't want to raise it necessarily in the call, the broader call, but that cross-team definition varies based on the person completing the survey. So someone might have been commenting about experience with sales ops, someone else might be experienced with finance, someone else might have been commenting about legal, someone else was commenting about marketing, someone else was commenting about customer success. Or even cross-team was sales. So I think pinning down the feedback on the source survey person, I mean, not anonymously, but what group are they from and what cross-team are they making that judgment about, would give a lot more insights. Because, my feedback, I'll tell you, was candidly entirely related to engaging with sales ops. All right, so that was, because that cross team is the one that's got the most influence and impact on my sales organization's ability to perform and be efficient. I'm not saying it was positive or negative. I'm just saying so I just think, David, if we're going to use this as a platform going forward, just understanding the source feedback, like which team source is coming from and which cross team they're commenting or providing that input, will give us a lot more insights on how we improve this. That would be an assessment.
Yeah, that's spot on, Anthony. It's and in fact, so typically in this case, we did it purposely sort of division wide to provide. But when we do the actual trust metrics rollout, typically starts with what we call 3 points of insight, and it's very specific. So it would be, for instance, feedback, from a given team on that team leader. On a if they do cross team, it would be a specific cross team. So it would be asking about, and then the third, can be well-being, it can be within team. You have choices, but you're absolutely right, because this really, trust metrics is a team level tool. It's unusual, a little unusual in that it gives team leaders a very powerful data-driven way to affect change, or for 2 teams to work together to improve their collaboration.
Got it.
Yeah. But yeah, you're
Thanks.
spot on with that. Yeah, the big pictures are interesting. You know, if you're a division manager, it gives you sort of a sense of where things are at, but it's not particularly actionable until you get down to the level you describe. You're right.
Hey, on a side note, while we've got a break in here, so you were in HP in Asia. What years?
I was there 2011 through 2019.
Ah, got it. Okay, we just missed each other. So
you were there as well.
I was there from 2002 to 2011, and then moved to SAP in 2011. So
were you out of Singapore?
Singapore, yeah. So I ran the HP software business for a few years.
Oh,
and then
yeah, sure.
Then prior to that, I ran the server storage networking business. So the ESS or ESSN business then.
Okay. That was before the HPE split. And yeah.
Yeah.
And also before the new building, you know, that's where we were still over in that old awful building. I don't know if you've seen the new facility there is, not that anybody's using it at the moment, but it's gorgeous.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I know I still had a lot of friends that are there.
Yeah, us as well. We really enjoyed those years in Singapore.
Hey, Jeb, with your research around trust and looking at different cultural influences, what are the biggest things that stand out around, for example, we've got Anthony and some other folks from the APAC team, right? In those, and don't even pretend to generalize that because there's lots of subcultures in that region, but are anything anything you would highlight in terms of differences about certain areas of APAC that's worth highlighting of interest?
Yeah, because my principal research was so little slight background there. I ended up doing my doctoral work when I was in Asia because HP sponsored it specifically to benefit from the work I did across all of the sales organization in Asia Pacific. And so I came away with two. One was a very humbling aha, which was that first off, when you look at leadership, leaders in Japan versus India versus South Pac versus, highly diverse. And, most of these people haven't gone to a Western MBA program. So the way they think about leadership, and that is very different than what those of us that were educated in the West. And that, their approach to leadership is often informed by the culture they come from. And it can be Confucianism in China or Hinduism in India to a large extent. So you have to get below that to have an impact. In my case, to have an impact as I was working with and coaching leaders across the region, I had to get below culture. I had to get, there was the time. And that's where this aha around trust as a catalyst and sort of the neurobiology, because there was no way I could go into India and with any humility say to my country manager there, I'm going to help you be a better Indian leader. Seriously, you just get laughed out the door, or respectfully, shown the door. But when I went in and said, let's talk about sort of what it is that motivates and drives your people as people, that was an interesting conversation. And so, we focused on the motivational drivers that were common to all human beings, finding purpose in your work, building the competency to support it, giving them the level of autonomy that's appropriate, and then allowing those leaders to shape that around who they were as leaders and best practices as a leader of a team in India. And so that was the big takeaway, is focus on the things that sit below culture, below generations, and get at the human elements, and then help those leaders apply those in the cultural context that makes them effective. And that was the only way I found I could look someone in the eye, 1 week in Japan, the next in Australia, and the next in Thailand, with any credibility that I could actually help them become more effective as a sales leader. And that was pretty cool because it works. When you get down below that level, you really make an impact on their core abilities as a leader.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yep.
Yeah. But using all the Western otherwise stuff, the stuff you read in all the books. Oh my God, seriously, they're like, really, it doesn't. it doesn't even compute in many instances when you're working with local sales teams in country.
Yeah. I think the other thing, David, as well is culturally, you see parts of Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Korea, China, and Japan, where it's very hierarchical in the organizational structure, and from a comfort factor of people talking about how they're feeling and verbalizing that, it's not an accepted approach. And then you take places like India and Australia, and they won't shut up. So I think the issue is also in teams, you get those groups that have a lot to contribute and have a lot of feelings or concerns around the way things may be run, and will never share those. And then you've got a group that overshare their experiences, which may not be the same as those other countries that Jeb was just mentioning. So if you're only relying on verbal interaction, you're missing probably what's actually happening for those people.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the other thing I found, Anthony, which was interesting, because again, we did even trust metrics, we did the core alpha, beta MVPs in Asia, was that if you get below those cultural dynamics at a human level, everybody has an expectation of their boss, their teammates, whatever. When you trigger that, it was weird. I mean, you know, Japan, right? And typically, unless you're out for drinks at night, people are not going to. They were writing in katakana kanji, but they were writing paragraphs. But it was only when you trigger, you got to trigger below that level where they feel as though it's a cultural norm, because you're right, you'll never get it. You'll never get it out of them. But when you get below it, suddenly people feel free. And I had this conversation with my team there, because I was like, why, this is unusual. And they were like, well, this, you weren't asking about things that, people would lose face about. You're asking about something very close to my heart. And I'm happy to share that. It's fascinating. Cool. Any other? I know, David, we're probably getting close to you guys starting the next session. Next part of the session.
Yes, we are. So we'll get started in just a moment.
Yeah, happy to. I could go on with this stuff all night, so it's you got to tell me when to shut up.
When folks get back, we'll say thank you and give everybody a chance to be here as well. So really appreciate you doing this, and it's so thought-provoking and helpful and insightful.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's and passion, as you guys can probably tell. Just David, just curious. I mean, so kind of what Anthony and I were just going back and forth. Do you find you see those that cultural dynamic challenge as because you're global, right? In your role from a sales enablement standpoint?
Is we still have a relatively small footprint in Asia Pacific region, so lots of growth there. Anthony and his team are doing phenomenal. I can speak to it more from Red Hat perspective when we had a larger team there, and absolutely dealing with different dynamics and even thinking about change management implications. Very different approaches that you got to think about to get buy-in and how you roll things out. And so we had to have local presence, right, to be able to influence and drive some of that. You can't do that effectively from outside, from afar.
Yeah, no, I found particularly did a couple of big transformation projects at the core of sort of our revenue in Japan. And I brought a new guy in from Israel actually, and I told him he was going to, in his first, he would come to me in 6 months and want to quit because he would be tearing his hair out. And I said to be patient. And it requires a very different ability to shift your lens and particularly take a long view without losing perspective on it's still got to get done. We had a huge margin problem there that was, we were off kilter by about 20 points of margin in a core consumables business. And it took a couple of years of persistent, persistent small incremental changes to get that done. But yeah, you definitely can't come in from a Western kind of cowboy perspective. Yeah, it ain't going to go anywhere. Yeah. The resistance definitely isn't futile in cultures like that. They'll wear you down.
I think it is. Yeah, we will start to move to the next phase of the session today. Jeb, thank you again. Really appreciate it. It's been great.
Been my pleasure, and everyone here, anyone on the call, please feel free to. If you've got questions, you think of it, you can reach out on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'm always happy to engage. And again, Josh has got all the details around what we do with trust metrics, et cetera. So again, thank you so much, guys, for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeb. It was awesome. Good to have you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Take care.
Take care.
So to continue our theme of building trust and building high performing teams, if you haven't had a chance to meet Denise Parsonage, then you'll get the opportunity right now. So Carolyn Bednar's, I think maybe you all have some more information. I think she had her second child this week. Denise is filling in as people business partner for the field organization in Carolyn's absence while she's on maternity leave. And in talking with Denise, we shared with her one of the things that was part of the pre-work is 5 dysfunctions of a team. So I know you've all, during the pre-work, there's a short video, a handbook page. Denise has a lot of experience in working with that model and understanding some of the nuances of that. So we've invited Denise to share her insights about 5 dysfunctions and share that with us today. Denise.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. And thanks for the warm welcome. It's, I think, week 3 for me now at GitLab. And you're right, Carolyn did have her baby boy, Jack, on Monday afternoon. So
awesome.
A new member to the GitLab family, extended family. But really excited to be here. And I know I have big shoes I'm stepping into, but I'm here to partner with you all as leaders in the organization. As David said, I'm really passionate about the work of Pat Lencioni. He's a really awesome author and has such great insights. And I hope that you've had the chance to read the handbook page and watch the video. But if you haven't, please take the time to read the book. It's excellent. It's, not a huge read, really fun, entertaining, and puts all of the concepts that we have been talking about in this challenge into a fable about a business leadership team. I think it will really resonate. And when we think about what makes a high performing team, how it's so important to have that foundation of trust and build on that. That is what the fable is all about and what this model is all about. So I want to dig in a little bit just to kind of verbalize the model, and then we'll have some dialogue around it, if that's okay. So really, as I mentioned, what's come up on Monday and again today is really about how trust is the foundation of a high-performing team. And when you have that absence of trust, that's one of the characteristics of a dysfunctional team. And the absence of trust, or the unwillingness to be vulnerable or human, really means that people won't be able to admit their mistakes, their weaknesses, and it's unlikely that team members will then bring innovative ideas or challenge authority. So it's important to build that trust, that vulnerability within your team, you as leaders as well. We all make mistakes, we all have bad days, we all need to just be vulnerable so that we can receive feedback, we can give feedback, and create dialogue. The second thing, so once you have that trust, really, if a dysfunctional team will have a fear of conflict or a fear of healthy debate. And why it's important to have that healthy debate is that it helps teams learn from mistakes. It helps teams take decisive action and really tap into the talent and experience of the whole team. So, you know, it's important to have that healthy dialogue and challenge each other's assumptions so that the team can really come together on meaty issues, you know, important issues, and that it's not unproductive arguing, but more about like, how can we get better as a team? How can we, you know, how can we have healthy disagreement, but ultimately challenge each other to an outcome and commit to that. This has a direct correlation with being an inclusive leader, and I'm sure you've thought about that. You know, one of the examples earlier around asking your team for their input, what their concerns are, that is both, and being able to debate that openly is just so important in having a high performing team. And then it's, you know, a dysfunctional team would have a lack of commitment. And so again, this is the next building block on this model. Teams need to be committed to be high performing and on the same page to succeed. Dysfunctional teams have failed to achieve that commitment, and they might lumber from one decision to the next. So again, one of the best traits of a high performing team is that they can make decisions and stand by them. The next step is around accountability. And so in the book, it talks about how ducking the responsibility of calling each other out, your peers, your team members, on unproductive behavior, or not driving the accountability of high performance, not confronting those difficult issues is really not productive and not helpful to your building of your high performing team. So effective teams hold each other accountable. They want to correct problematic or counterproductive behavior, and they maintain those consistent high standards. You can't do that unless you have the trust, that, you know, willingness to debate, that commitment to each other and to a decision, and then driving that accountability. And finally, it's about results and focusing on the results of the team. And so what happens is that if you aren't thinking about the team results and focusing on the entire team, because you have a clear mission, a clear objectives, that inattention to results would then result in people focusing on their personal success and status and ego before the team success. And when you're thinking about you're building a high performance team, it's the team, it's the whole team. So it's really, again, you know, start with the trust. That's the foundation, and really thinking through each of these important parts of a high performing team, but you can't do it without that foundation of trust. There's a really great tool on the Table Group website if you want to do a team assessment in terms of how your team is performing against this model. Really getting some self-assessment from the team on, do we have a high level of trust in our team? Are we comfortable with that open debate and dialogue around key issues? Are we committed? Are we driving accountability in our team? And then, of course, finally, do we have that focus on outcomes and results? So you can always tap into that or connect with me or Josh if you want to have more information about that. If you go to the next slide. So I'm really curious just to, you know, have some dialogue with you all about what have you experienced in terms of these 5 dysfunctions, either here at GitLab or in another team that you've worked on, and what are some effective ways that you've been able to kind of turn those dysfunctions into a high-performing team?
Hey, Denise, it's Nick. I'll share.
Okay, I can't see you. There you are. Hi.
Hey. I did the 3 Mississippi before I came off mute.
Oh, good.
So going through the 5 dysfunctions, it was really interesting to think about it and think about some of the best teams that I've been a part of, and I think all of us have been a part of. And we talked about this earlier this week, that some of the things that make a team so great is that the team has the ability to hold each other accountable and pushes each other to be the best that they can be.
Yeah.
So it was almost the reverse effect of looking at the 5 dysfunctions, where if you take the opposite of these 5 dysfunctions, it really leads to a high performance environment. And then immediately after I had that aha moment, I got the anxiety of how do you curate that so that we don't fall into dysfunction land? Because if we fall into dysfunction land, it's really hard to come out of it. So it's almost a proactive measure of how do I get in front of this before these dysfunctions appear. And I don't know, sometimes, all of us have taken over teams where we've stepped into a dysfunctional environment and we've had to work our way out of it. And those are challenging situations. So I guess, no scenario is perfect, but I would be really curious from your perspective on just how do we stay ahead of it to make sure that we don't fall into these dysfunctions?
Yeah, it starts with the bottom of that triangle, building trust and dialogue with your team, having that psychological safety in your team, challenging. Also, as the leader, like letting the team speak first, getting that input from them and buy-in. And I think that it's difficult when you take over a new team, but also such an opportunity. Like you have the opportunity right then to build that trust and create expectations, team norms. I think you may have spoken through some of that, is like, this is how we're going to work together. I think you mentioned that in the last session, didn't you, Nick, around like really contracting and having that dialogue. This is what we expect from each other. You hold me accountable, I'll hold you accountable. Like this is how we are going to be successful as a team. And it's just so important to have that dialogue.
I guess as a quick follow on to that, the one that really stands out to me is lack of commitment. Yeah. Absence of trust, we've all been there. We've got to work towards it. Fear of conflict, we either like to lean into it or we don't. The lack of commitment is a weird one because it's really hard to get people to go all in if they think the organization's out to get them, or a peer doesn't have their best interest in mind and things like that. So I think that's one that I look at and just think is top of mind. And how do we overcome that?
Yeah, so the lack of commitment, how I look at it is, if you have that healthy debate and you listen and challenge, but then ultimately you commit to the decision. It's you understand the why, you've had an opportunity to discuss the why, give your perspective, even if ultimately the decision isn't what you had hoped for, you're committed to that decision as a leader. And so that's where I think I always use the term listen, challenge, and commit, because ultimately you don't want the conversation after the meeting where, oh, I didn't really agree with that, but I didn't speak up, right? And so you have to have that trust and the dialogue first before you can get to that commitment. Does that help?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
I was thinking too, sometimes when I see a lack of commitment with a team member or an employee at an other organization, it's paralleled to a lack of confidence as well. Like maybe they don't believe in themselves, and like your role as the manager is to build that confidence through trust. And I don't know if there's any correlation there, but it's kind of what I've seen: lack of commitment, lack of confidence.
Just to put a bow on this for myself, I think we iterate so quickly at GitLab that we don't have a lot of space to not commit, because we're already on to the second iteration by the time we've decided that we're going to commit, right?
Yeah, that's 100%. We move so fast.
Yeah.
So a couple observations I have about this. One is public sector team that I'm a part of. Some of the team has been together 3+ years, and we're bringing in new leaders now. and there's trying to figure out how these new leaders come in and assimilate. So we're kind of we need to go through this more proactive exercise because we kind of grew organically and there was a lot of trust and we built things up over time. So there's one vector that is around that I think about. This is a nice framework to kind of, let's go back down to the basics and revalidate, because we do have some new team members, even where we have established leaders, we have some new team members. So I can see a validity to that. The second aspect is I feel like GitLab, like many companies, has teams of teams. And I don't think we go through this exercise necessarily with our teams of teams. We think of this as, I'm the leader of my team and I'm gonna go through this there. But I think this would be a valuable exercise for some of the teams of teams, because what came out in the trust metrics was we were challenged with our teams of teams and starting to think about, okay, how could you apply the same exercise to that, that cohort, if you will.
Yeah, great insight, Jim. And I don't know if I missed it in this session, but did Jeb mention the Team of Teams book by McChrystal? Yeah, it's a great book if you're interested in reading.
Yeah, can we drop it in the document so it'll persist beyond the Slack, the chat here?
Yeah, I'll throw it in there. It's
Josh is already ahead of me here. He's like, that's his superpower there.
Yeah, there it is. Oh, David's on it. No, it's David's superpower.
Yeah, there's I've been thinking about a tool that I've used in other companies around new leader assimilation. And it brings in I pinged Josh saying, do we do something like this? Because it can be really helpful. And as a new leader, really being human with your team, kind of helping them understand who you are as a person, but also like going through that expectation setting dialogue about what they as the team expect from you as a leader, and kind of having that that conversation that I know Nick has done some of that with his team. So something that I've been thinking about, like how could we maybe utilize that tool for you all here at GitLab? Good. Any other insights you want to share before we move on? I know this is a lot and you've had a number of tools thrown your way, but I think that's what's great is you can pick and mix what feels right for you and your team. You don't have to use every one of them. And they all have so many similarities between, and as I'm sure you've recognized, the theme I see is that foundation of trust in everything we've been talking about throughout these sessions.
And
Awesome.
Denise, one thing I just wanted to throw in. So I guess I'm trying to put this together in my head, because in looking at the results of those two kind of diverse or two distinct groups in terms of feedback regarding trust of other teams, like I see that with my own team. And I think internally we trust each other. There's a lot of, banter that goes back and forth. There's dart throwing, there's congratulations, there's all that. We were just like kind of, a big family. But outside of our team, I'm struggling a little bit to figure out how to encourage trust and bolster security in terms of that outreach program. Because I think there's this underlying theme of I don't want to reach out and be the one that says XYZ because I'm going to get my hand slapped or whatever. I think that growing, hopefully not growing, trend of distrust outside the team. I'm thinking I need some brainstorming and tools on how to bring that into my group, because I think cross-functional trust and collaboration is obviously paramount to our business and to the success of our business.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback. Josh, do you have any?
I didn't want to be that to be like wah wah, but but I was also just kind of surfacing that to the group to kind of say like, hey, are you feeling the same thing? And do you have suggestions as to tools to I mean, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, so I think I've been at GitLab a year and 2 months, and I've seen it change a lot since I've been here. And I think, one area that I think we're looking to improve is communication silos. And I think we're still structured, I think, and because of Slack, because of the handbook, it's really easy for our organization to be siloed. And, we just hired the internal communications person, Simon, to kind of, beef up our internal communications, our cross-functional collaboration across teams. But I think it's going to be a huge area for us. And I don't have a solution right away. I think we're still sort of operating the same way we would have when we were only 300 team members, and now we're 1,300 with projected growth over the next 3 years to grow that. I don't know of a quick fix. I would just say any cross-functional meetings or synchronous activities or surveys that you can do with other teams that you work closely with to build that trust can go a long way. I don't know. I'm hesitant to recommend like a Slack channel or a handbook page, because I think that's part of what's making us so siloed. And that's just what I'm seeing on the people side. I'm not in the field organization, but that's my perspective. I'm curious anybody else.
And I guess I wasn't expecting a silver bullet, but I just wanted to kind of verbalize that, because I assume if I have that feeling that other people probably do too, I'm likely not alone in that.
I don't pretend to have the answer either, but a couple thoughts come to mind. I totally agree with Josh's suggestion of, of some team building, and and still doing virtual team building at this point, but just to establish some more of the relationships so that folks are at ease with each other, and it's all about that trust. But a couple others that come to mind: GitLab does have a 365 feedback process, and I know folks, the people team is talking about like the timing of when that's going to launch again. That would be good to encourage, for the team members to list out, colleagues from some of those other functions, so that they can get some candid feedback in an anonymous way, right? To at least be awareness of it, be aware of how others perceive you. But I think also in general, just we move so quickly that it's hard to find time for it. But I think we do need to make space to have some of that healthy dialogue, and whether it's entire teams or part of teams, or it's the leaders talking with one another, I think it's critical that you establish some kind of common, shared pool of meaning of, look, we're all after the same thing. We're a team. These are some of the, and it's not personal, just make it objective. These are the challenges. These are things that are going well. It's bi-directional. What do we do about it? I don't pretend that that's easy. And I haven't figured it out. But other thoughts?
The other thought I would add is that this is normal for companies as they scale to kind of stub their toes on this, kind of team of teams, cross-functional collaboration, communication. And I've seen it at all sizes of companies. I mean, even I worked at Apple for a couple of years. They're very functionally based, and so it does take intention and thoughtfulness to really drive that communication between teams, that open dialogue. And it's better to be intentional about it now as you're growing up through the tween stages, than waiting until it becomes a real problem. So I don't think there's a silver bullet either, but there's probably some nudges and little things like David mentioned that we can do intentionally.
Something that comes to mind with that intentionality is our async culture. So working with a couple of teams where there was a lack of trust, and it was around follow-up. We had a discussion around, well, have we been clear what the ask is? I think I mentioned on a prior call, our solution architect team talks about working agreements. But I think that can work to our advantage. Have we been clear about what our working agreement is, what the asks are those documented? Some teams use GDocs for their team meetings, some teams are using GitLab and issues. But let's go back to one of our values around async and efficiency. and say, have we been as clear as we can be around that ask before we're saying we're not getting fulfillment of that ask?
That's definitely a mistake I've made. That came up today in a good conversation with David, right? Of, hey, have I been, and it's causing some self-reflection in a good way, right? Of, was I clear? Yeah, with expectations, and no wonder if I'm not being clear, what can I expect? So I think it's good to kind of pause, and before throwing stones, yeah, think about, all right, how can I improve?
Yeah, it's definitely a quite the discussion. So anybody else have anything to share there before we move out? Anthony or?
No, you're like, kind of what David's saying. It's maybe I'm not trying to manage by quotes, but I had another experience as well where it's kind of describes what David's just gone through, and someone's always said to me, set your expectations, don't discuss your disappointments. And so it's kind of like there's a tendency that if you haven't set those expectations correctly, your conversations around a disappointment on something that's happened, that the person you're discussing the disappointment was unclear on the original expectation. So you're immediately in a state of conflict. So I think this idea of set your expectations, or you'll make sure expectations are clear, then you're not discussing disappointments. You're just discussing the gap between performance and expectations. So it's just another way to think about it. My wife reminds me of that all the time, so don't worry.
She sounds very wise.
She's very wise.
My husband's always on a pip, so. I don't know if it's his fault or mine, but.
Were you clear with your expectations? Was it a performance gap, or was it expectations performance miss?
It depends on who you speak to, David.
That's fair. That sounds familiar. In my world too, yeah.
It does. So I know we've got about 5 minutes left. We threw a ton at you today. Listening to Jeb, going over the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I know it was a lot of information to sort of absorb during a 2-hour session. So this is longer than most meetings we have here at GitLab. So appreciate your dedication to learning. And, I'm curious, as we close out, what is, one takeaway that you're going to put into practice from what you learned today? You could verbalize it, you could throw it in the chat there, but any big takeaways that you uncovered during this session? I know for me,
I think I'm sorry, go ahead, Josh.
No, go ahead, Jim. Jim, go ahead.
The nudge concept, I think, aligns with our MVC. And if we can, nudge our MVC and take little steps forward and be thoughtful and pragmatic, I think we can, over time, it's a journey of 1,000 steps. So for me, the nudges and, just focus on what we could be doing this week to improve our situation.
It's great.
Awesome.
I think for me, the fear of conflict is something I probably need to work on with my team. And I don't say that I want to squash debate, but I'm not sure that I encourage it enough. And that's something I'm gonna have to take back to my team.
I really like the trust performance matrix and taking a look at, if they're high performing but low trust, what's the impact to our team?
Yeah, that's a great one. All right. Well, David, anything else to add before we end for the day?
I don't want to be the last person. I was gonna I'll hold it. I was gonna no. Thank you all for your time commitment today and throughout the program. So we will get back together in a week. So the third of 3 sessions is 1 week from today, Wednesday, June 2nd. Again, 2 different time options. Choose one of the 2. And just friendly reminder, if you haven't already, I know many have, but please do complete module 3 in the pre-work, and that'll make the best use of our time and help to get the most out of our time together next week. That's all I've got, unless there are any other questions. Thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Good rest of your day.
Thanks.